The rain started just as they lowered Ethan's casket into the ground. I watched the droplets hit the polished wood, each one a tiny percussion against the silence that had swallowed my world whole. 10 years old. My baby was 10 years old, and his heart had simply given up fighting. I clutched Daniel's hand so tight I must have cut off his circulation, but he didn't flinch. He stood beside me like a stone pillar, the only thing keeping me upright as Father Martinez spoke words that bounced off my grief like stones off glass. Something about God's plan, something about peace. None of it mattered. None of it brought back my boy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Ethan was the bravest person I've ever known. I whispered when it was my turn to speak, my voice barely audible over the rain pattering against the funeral tent. He never complained, not once. Through all the hospital stays and treatments, he'd comfort other kids in the cardiac unit, telling them jokes when his own chest hurt so bad he could barely breathe. I looked out at the faces gathered under the gray canvas. Maria from next door, her dark eyes wet with tears. Mr. Chen from the corner store, who always saved Ethan the comics with the best covers. Ethan's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd driven 3 hours just to be here. Maybe 30 people total, scattered across folding chairs like lost souls. But the chairs that mattered most sat empty. I kept glancing toward the back, waiting for them to slip in late, waiting for Mom's perfectly styled silver hair to appear, Dad's broad shoulders and his navy suit, waiting for Sophia to click in wearing something inappropriate and too expensive, complaining about the weather ruining her blowout. They never came. He was the bravest person I've ever known, I whispered when it was my turn to speak, my voice barely audible over the rain pattering against the funeral tent. He never complained, not once. Through all the hospital stays and treatments, he'd comfort other kids in the cardiac unit, telling them jokes when his own chest hurt so bad he could barely breathe. I looked out at the faces gathered under the gray canvas. Maria from next door, her dark eyes wet with tears. Mr. Chen from the corner store, who always saved Ethan the comics with the best covers. Ethan's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd driven 3 hours just to be here. Maybe 30 people total, scattered across folding chairs like lost souls. But the chairs that mattered most sat empty. I kept glancing toward the back, waiting for them to slip in late, waiting for Mom's perfectly styled silver hair to appear, Dad's broad shoulders in his navy suit, waiting for Sophia to click in wearing something inappropriate and too expensive, complaining about the weather ruining her blowout. They never came. He was the bravest person I've ever known. I whispered when it was my turn to speak, my voice barely audible over the rain pattering against the funeral tent. He never complained, not once, through all the hospital stays and treatments. He'd comfort other kids in the cardiac unit, telling them jokes when his own chest hurt so bad he could barely breathe. I looked out at the faces gathered under the gray canvas. Maria from next door, her dark eyes wet with tears. Mr. Chen from the corner store, who always saved Ethan the comics with the best covers. Ethan's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd driven 3 hours just to be here. Maybe 30 people total, scattered across folding chairs like lost souls. But the chairs that mattered most sat empty. I kept glancing toward the back, waiting for them to slip in late, waiting for Mom's perfectly styled silver hair to appear, Dad's broad shoulders in his navy suit, waiting for Sophia to click in wearing something inappropriate and too expensive, complaining about the weather ruining her blowout. They never came. He was the bravest person I've ever known, I said aloud, struggling to keep my voice steady. He wanted to be a pilot someday, said he'd fly so high he could touch the clouds. I think I think maybe he's flying now. The words turned to ash in my mouth. Pretty lies we tell ourselves when the truth is too brutal to bear. The truth was that my son was gone, and my parents couldn't be bothered to show up. The truth was that while I was burying my child, they were probably somewhere sipping champagne and celebrating. After the service, as people filed past to offer their condolences, I heard the whispers, felt the sideways glances. "Where is her family?" someone murmured. "I heard they went to that wedding in Mexico instead," came the reply, barely audible but sharp as broken glass. Maria squeezed my shoulder. "Mija, you need anything? Anything at all, you call me, day or night." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Behind her, other neighbors and friends echoed the sentiment, people who barely knew us, showing more loyalty than my own blood. Daniel helped me to the car, while the cemetery workers prepared to finish what we'd started. I couldn't watch them fill in the grave, couldn't watch the earth swallow up the last piece of my heart. As we drove away, I made a silent promise to Ethan's memory. Someday, I would make sense of this betrayal. Someday, I would understand how a mother could choose celebration over her grandson's funeral. But not today. Today, I just needed to survive the next breath, and then the one after that. The rain followed us home, drumming against the windshield like tears from a sky that understood my grief better than my own family ever would. That night, I couldn't sleep. Daniel had finally dozed off around midnight, exhausted from holding both of us together all day. But I lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind racing in circles. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's empty hospital bed, the way his hand felt so small in mine during those final moments, the sound of the heart monitor going flat. I reached for my phone, knowing I shouldn't, knowing it would only hurt worse. But grief makes you do stupid things, desperate things. The first photo hit me like a physical blow. Sophia, radiant, in ivory silk, her arms thrown around Mom and Dad on a pristine beach in Cancun. Golden hour lighting, professional photographer, everyone's teeth gleaming white as the sand beneath their feet. The caption read, "Best parents ever. Thanks for making my dream day perfect. Blessed, destination wedding, Familia." I scrolled down, my chest tightening with each image. Dad walking Sophia down a petal-strewn aisle, tears of joy streaming down his face. Mom adjusting her Sophia's veil with trembling hands, her expression soft with pride. The same woman who hadn't shed a single tear for Ethan, who hadn't called once during his final week in the hospital. More photos. A champagne toast where Dad declared Sophia the light of our lives. Mom dancing with her new son-in-law, her face glowing with happiness. Extended family members I'd grown up with, all dressed in pastels and paradise, all celebrating while my son lay cold in the ground.
The comments were even worse. "Such a beautiful family," Aunt Carmen had written. "Perfect weekend for a perfect couple," added Cousin Luis. Uncle Roberto, "Nothing better than a family celebration. Life is good." Life is good? While I was choosing flowers for a 10-year-old's casket, life was apparently very good indeed. "Amelia?" Daniel's voice was rough with sleep. I hadn't realized I was crying until he reached over to wipe the tears from my cheeks. "Baby, put the phone down." "Look at them, Daniel. Just look." I held the screen toward him, my hands shaking. "They're so happy. So fucking happy." He took the phone gently and set it on the nightstand. In the darkness, I could see the tight line of his jaw, the way his shoulders had gone rigid. I should have known they'd do this. What do you mean? Your parents, Amelia. They've never hidden what they think of us, of Ethan's condition. Remember when he was diagnosed? Your mother's first words weren't about how we'd get through it. They were about how embarrassing it would be to explain to people. The memory hit like a slap. Mom standing in the cardiologist's office, her face pale, not with worry, but with mortification. What will we tell people at church, at the club? She was just in shock, I whispered, the same excuse I'd been making for years. No, she was worried about appearances, just like always. Daniel's voice held a bitterness I'd rarely heard from him. And your father, asking if it was really necessary to post about Ethan's condition on Facebook, like our son's fight for his life was some dirty family secret. I wanted to argue, to defend them, but the words wouldn't come. Not when Sophia's wedding photos were still burned into my retinas. Not when I could see Mom's genuine joy for her younger daughter's happiness, a joy she'd never shown for anything in my life. They made their choice, Daniel said quietly, pulling me against his chest. They chose a party over their grandson's funeral. They chose champagne and dancing over being there when their daughter needed them most. I pressed my face into his shoulder and let the truth wash over me, like drowning. My parents had made their choice, and it wasn't me. It had never been me. The phone buzzed with another notification, another congratulatory comment on Sophia's perfect day. I didn't look. I couldn't look anymore. But I knew, with the cold certainty of fresh grief, that I'd never be able to unsee those photos, never be able to forget the pure happiness on their faces while my world ended in silence. 3 days later, I stood on my parents' front porch, my finger hovering over the doorbell. The same brass button I'd pressed 1,000 times as a child, racing home from school with scraped knees and broken hearts, always sure that behind this door waited comfort and understanding. How naive I had been. Daniel had offered to come with me, but this was something I needed to do alone. Maria had taken some vacation time to stay with us, bringing casseroles and tissues, and the kind of steady presence that made you remember not everyone abandons you in your darkest hour. She'd hug me tight before I left. You tell them exactly what you need to tell them, mija. Don't let them make you small. The door opened before I could ring, as if Mom had been watching through the curtains. She looked exactly the same as she had in the wedding photos. Perfectly styled hair, flawless makeup, not a trace of grief or guilt marring her composed features. Amelia. Her voice was careful, controlled. I wondered when you'd come by. No hug, no apology, no acknowledgement that she'd missed her grandson's funeral for a party. Can I come in? She stepped aside wordlessly, leading me to the living room where Dad sat in his leather recliner, reading the financial section like it was any other Tuesday morning. He looked up when we entered, his expression already defensive. Before you say anything, he began, folding his newspaper with crisp efficiency, you need to understand that this was an impossible situation. We had to make a choice. You had to make a choice. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, hollow and thin. Between your daughter's wedding and your grandson's funeral? Between celebrating life and dwelling in death, Mom corrected, settling onto the couch with her ankles crossed, every inch the picture of propriety. Sophia's wedding was planned for over a year. The deposits were non-refundable. Family flew in from Puerto Rico. Ethan was your family too. The silence stretched like a wound.
Dad cleared his throat. Of course he was. But Lillian is right. This was a once-in-a-lifetime event. Sophia will only get married once. Ethan will only die once, too. The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and choking. Mom flinched, the first crack in her perfect composure. That's morbid, Amelia, and unfair. She smoothed her skirt,
a nervous gesture I remembered from childhood. "You have to understand, we weren't abandoning you. We were making the practical choice. Ethan wouldn't have wanted us to ruin Sophia's special day." Something cold and sharp crystallized in my chest. Ethan's special day was supposed to be his graduation from 5th grade, his first date, his wedding, his children. But he'll never have those because he's dead. And you chose champagne toasts over honoring his memory? "We're not monsters," Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We loved that boy. But life doesn't stop for grief, Amelia. You can't expect the world to pause because you're hurting." I didn't expect the world to pause. I expected my parents to show up. And what would that have accomplished? Mom's voice was rising, her careful composure finally cracking. Standing in the rain, watching them put a box in the ground? How would that have helped anyone? "It would have meant you cared more about your daughter and grandson than about appearances." "This isn't about appearances," Dad snapped, rising from his chair. "This is about accepting reality, about not wallowing in tragedy when there's joy to be celebrated. Sophia needed us there." "I needed you there." "You're 32 years old, Amelia. You have a husband. You have support. Sophia was getting married." The casual cruelty of it, the matter-of-fact dismissal of my grief hit me like a physical blow. I looked at these people who'd raised me, who taught me to tie my shoes and ride a bike, who cheered at my high school graduation and walked me down the aisle at my own wedding. Strangers. They were strangers who happened to share my DNA. "You know what I realized yesterday?" I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. "Ethan never drew pictures of you. In all those art therapy sessions at the hospital, he drew me and Daniel and Maria and his friends, but never his grandparents. Because even at 10 years old, he knew you weren't really there." Mom's face went pale. Dad's jaw worked silently. "He knew," I continued, gathering my purse and standing to leave. "And now, I know too." I walked to the door on unsteady legs, my vision blurring with unshed tears. Behind me, I heard Mom's voice, smaller now, more uncertain. "Amelia, wait. We can talk about this. We can work it out." I turned back one last time, looking at the woman who'd given me birth, who'd fed me and clothed me and taught me to say my prayers. The woman who'd chosen a party over my son's funeral. "There's nothing to work out. You made your choice. Now live with it." I drove home in a daze, Mom's words echoing in my head. Life doesn't stop for grief. Maybe not, but apparently, love did. At least the kind I thought was unconditional, unbreakable. But I was wrong about one thing. It wasn't unbreakable. It was just broken. And I was finally ready to stop trying to fix it. The house felt different when I returned from my parents' place, smaller somehow, like the walls had shifted inward while I was gone. Daniel was in the kitchen making coffee, with hands that trembled slightly, the first sign he'd shown that the weight of everything was crushing him too. "How did it go?" he asked, though my face probably told him everything. "About as well as you'd expect." I collapsed into a chair at our small dining table, the same one that Ethan used to do his homework, tongue poking out in concentration as he worked through math problems. "They think they did nothing wrong. Mom actually said life doesn't stop for grief." Daniel set a mug in front of me, the steam rising between us like incense for the dead. "I'm sorry, baby. I know you hoped." "I hoped they were human beings." The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. Stupid of me, really. We sat in silence for a while, the house settling around us with its familiar creaks and sighs. I found myself listening for sounds that would never come again. Ethan's feet thundering down the stairs, his voice calling for help with a video game, the soft wheeze of his breathing when his heart was having a rough day. I should go through his room, I said finally. Pack some things.
We don't have to do that yet. Yes, we do. I stood, my legs unsteady. Maria said she'd help, but I need to do this myself first. Ethan's room was exactly as he'd left it. The model airplane we'd been building together sat half-finished on his desk, tiny plastic pieces sorted into careful piles. His walls were covered with drawings, dinosaurs and rockets and superheroes with big smiles and cape-covered hearts on their chests. But as I really looked at them for the first time since he died, I noticed something that made my breath catch. In every family drawing, it was just the three of us. Me, Daniel, and Ethan. Sometimes Maria appeared in the background, watering her garden. Sometimes his teacher or a friend from school. But never my parents. Never Grandma and Grandpa Morales. I sat on his bed, holding a crayon drawing titled My Family and shaking hands. Had I been so desperate to maintain the illusion of a loving extended family that I'd ignored my own son's instincts? Even at 10, Ethan had seen what I'd been too stubborn to accept, that my parents had never really been part of our lives in any meaningful way. Mija? Maria's voice came from the doorway. Daniel said you're up here. I held up the drawing. Look at this. Really look. She studied it for a long moment, her weathered face soft with understanding. Children see truth better than adults sometimes. They don't make excuses for people the way we do. He knew they didn't care about him. All those times I dragged him to their house for obligatory holiday visits, all those awkward conversations where they asked about school but never really listened to his answers. He saw it all. And he loved you enough not to say anything. Maria sat beside me on the little bed, her presence a comfort I hadn't expected. That boy protected your feelings right up until the end. The tears came then, hot and bitter. Not just for Ethan, but for the years I'd wasted trying to force my parents to love him the way I did, the way any grandparent should love their grandchild. They never even tried. When he was diagnosed, Mom's first concern was what people would think. Dad asked if we really needed to make it public on social media, like Ethan's heart condition was some embarrassing family secret. Some people can't handle anything that doesn't fit their picture-perfect world, Maria said gently. Your parents built their lives around appearances, and a sick grandchild didn't match their image. But he wasn't just sick. He was brave and funny and so damn smart. He could have been anything if his heart had been stronger. He was everything, and the right people saw that. She gestured toward the drawings covering his walls. Look at all these pictures from school, from the hospital. Look how many people came to the funeral despite the short notice. Ethan was loved, Mija, just not by the people you thought should love him most. I found my phone and scrolled through the condolence messages that had been pouring in since the funeral. Teachers, neighbors, parents of his classmates, nurses from the cardiac unit, people who'd known Ethan for months or years, not decades like my parents. People who'd seen his worth immediately. I keep thinking I should have known, should have seen the signs that they'd abandon us when things got really bad. You were being a daughter, a mother. You were hoping they'd rise to the occasion when you needed them most. Maria's voice was firm, but kind. Their failure isn't yours. Daniel appeared in the doorway, his face drawn with exhaustion. Your Aunt Carmen is on the phone. She wants to talk. My stomach clenched. Aunt Carmen, Mom's sister, who'd been at the wedding, who'd commented on how perfect everything was while we buried our son. What does she want? She says she needs to explain that there are things you don't understand about the situation. I looked at Maria, who shrugged. Up to you, Mija, but remember, explanations and excuses aren't the same thing. I took the phone with trembling hands, steeling myself for another round of justifications and deflections. Hello, Aunt Carmen. Amelia, sweetheart, I'm so sorry for your loss. Ethan was such a special boy. The past tense hit like a slap. Thank you. Listen, I need you to know that your parents are devastated for missing the funeral. They're just too proud to admit they made a mistake. A mistake? My voice rose dangerously. A mistake is forgetting to return a phone call or missing a birthday. Choosing a wedding over your grandson's funeral isn't a mistake. It's a choice.
You have to understand, they'd already committed to the wedding. Sophia was counting on them. I was counting on them too. But you're stronger than Sophia. You always have been. They knew you'd get through this without them. The casual cruelty of it, wrapped in what she probably thought was a compliment, left me speechless for a moment. So, I'm being punished for being strong? For not falling apart dramatically enough to earn their attention? That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. I could feel something fundamental shifting inside me, like tectonic plates realigning after an earthquake. And you know what, Aunt Carmen? You're right. I am strong. Strong enough to see this family for what it really is. Strong enough to build a life without people who think my grief is negotiable. I hung up before she could respond, my hands steady for the first time in days. What did she say? Daniel asked. She said I'm strong enough to get through this without them. I looked around Ethan's room, at the drawings that told the truth about our family better than any words could. And for once, they're right about something. The extended family started choosing sides exactly 1 week after the funeral. It began with a group text from Cousin Louis that I hadn't asked to be included in, but somehow was. Can we all just agree that this drama needs to stop? Family is family. Amelia needs to forgive and move on. I stared at the message, then at the string of responses that followed. Green bubbles of judgment lighting up my screen like fireflies. Cousin Maria, not my neighbor Maria, but Dad's niece. Agreed, holding grudges helps no one. Uncle Roberto, life is too short for this. Ethan wouldn't want his family fighting. On Sophia, some people just handle grief differently. Doesn't make them bad people. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. Instead, I typed back, "You're right, family is family. That's why they should have been at their grandson's funeral." The typing indicators appeared and disappeared like a digital nervous tick. Finally, Louis responded, "Look, I get that you're hurting, but you're being unfair to your parents. They love you." I wanted to block them all, but I had to see this through. No, unfair was not having my parents there when my son was buried. I aired my grievance because no one was listening to my words. The family farting digging deep. I now had relatives naturally divided into two groups, the ones who think my behavior is unjustifiable and the ones who supported my grief and think I'm being straightforward. I made it very clear I do not want them to support me from a hidden corner. I want them to do so in day-broad light. The worst message came from Sophia herself, 2 weeks after she'd returned from her honeymoon. "Amelia, I know you're going through a hard time, but posting about Mom and Dad on Facebook was really inappropriate. My wedding weekend was supposed to be perfect, and now everyone's talking about drama instead of celebrating my marriage. Can you please delete the posts and apologize? People are starting to think our family is dysfunctional." I read it 3 times before the full meaning sank in. Posts on Facebook. I'd barely been on social media since Ethan died, too raw to face the cheerful minutiae of other people's lives. But I logged in and found what she was talking about. Someone had shared the local newspaper's obituary for Ethan, the one that mentioned loving parents Amelia and Daniel Torres, but made no reference to surviving grandparents. Someone else had commented, "So sad that his own grandparents chose a wedding over his funeral. What kind of people do that?" The comment thread had exploded. Friends, acquaintances, even strangers weighing in on my family's dysfunction. Some defending my parents, others expressing shock and disgust. My private pain had become public spectacle, and Sophia was worried about her image. I called her before I could lose my nerve. "Sophia, it's Amelia." "Oh, good, you got my message. So you'll delete the posts." "I didn't post anything, and I'm not responsible for what other people say about our family." "But you could ask them to stop, or at least not encourage it." "Encourage it?"
My voice was deadly quiet. "Sophia, our son died. My 10-year-old child is in the ground, and you're worried about your reputation? I'm worried about our family. This public drama isn't helping anyone. Our family died when Mom and Dad chose your bachelorette party over Ethan's last days in the hospital. That's not fair. They couldn't have known. They knew he was dying. We all knew. The doctors told us he had days, maybe hours, and they flew to Mexico anyway because God forbid they miss your precious wedding weekend." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "Look," Sophia said finally, her voice taking on the patronizing tone she'd perfected in childhood, "I understand you're grieving, but you can't expect the world to revolve around your tragedy. My wedding was important too." Something snapped inside me, clean and final as a bone breaking. "You're right," I said calmly. "Your wedding was important. More important than your nephew's life, apparently. More important than your sister's grief. More important than basic human decency." "Amelia!" "I hope it was everything you dreamed of, Sophia. I hope every detail was perfect. Because it cost us our relationship, and I hope it was worth it."
The idea terrified me. Sitting in a circle with other broken parents, sharing the worst moment of my life with strangers. But the isolation was becoming unbearable. Most of our friends had stopped calling, uncomfortable with grief that wouldn't conform to their timeline for healing. My family had made their choice, and while Daniel was my anchor, I could see the weight of being my only support wearing on him. "I don't know what I'm supposed to say to them," I admitted, sitting at the table while Maria served generous portions of rice and chicken. "You say whatever you need to say, or nothing at all." She poured sweet tea into tall glasses, the ice clinking like small bells. "Sometimes just sitting with people who get it is enough." Daniel came in from the garage, oil-stained and tired from another long day at the shop. He'd been working overtime since the funeral, trying to keep busy, trying to stay ahead of the grief that lurked in quiet moments. "Smells incredible in here," he said, kissing my forehead before washing his hands. "How was your day?" "Had another call from Aunt Carmen. She wants me to come to Sunday dinner this weekend. Says it's time to heal the family rift." Daniel's jaw tightened. "What did you tell her?" "That I was busy." "Good," Maria's voice was firm. "You don't owe them your forgiveness just because they're related to you." We ate in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from shared understanding rather than awkwardness. Maria told us about her grandson's soccer game, Daniel shared a funny story from work, and for a few minutes, it almost felt normal, like we were just a family having dinner, not three people clinging to each other in the aftermath of devastating loss. After Maria left, I finally worked up the courage to look up the grief support group online. The website was simple, designed by someone who understood that bereaved parents didn't have energy for complicated navigation. "Supporting families through loss," it read, "a safe space for parents grieving the death of a child." The meeting was held in the basement of St. Margaret's Episcopal Church, a building I'd driven past 1,000 times without really seeing. I almost turned around 3 times on the way there, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. But Daniel's words echoed in my head. "You don't have to carry this alone." The basement smelled like coffee and old books, with fluorescent lighting that cast everything in harsh relief. About 12 people sat in folding chairs, arranged in a loose circle, ranging in age from barely 20 to late 60s. The group leader, a woman named Janet, whose own teenage son had died by suicide 5 years earlier, welcomed me with the kind of gentleness that comes from intimate knowledge of pain. "We don't pressure anyone to share," she explained as I took a seat, "but if you want to tell us about your child, we'd love to hear." For the first hour, I just listened. Sarah, whose infant daughter had died of SIDS, Marcus, whose 7-year-old son had been killed by a drunk driver, Linda, whose teenage daughter had lost her battle with leukemia. Each story was different, but the grief underneath was achingly familiar. When it was my turn to speak, the words came easier than I had expected. My son, Ethan, died 3 months ago. He was 10, heart condition. I paused, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. My parents didn't come to his funeral. They chose to go to my sister's wedding instead. The collective intake of breath around the circle was audible. In this room full of people who'd experienced the worst loss imaginable, my story still had the power to shock. Jesus, Marcus muttered. I'm sorry. How are you handling that betrayal on top of your grief? Janet asked gently. And suddenly, it all came pouring out. The wedding photos on social media, the confrontation with my parents, the family taking sides, the isolation and anger and guilt that had been eating me alive for months. I keep thinking I should forgive them, I finished. Everyone says family is family, that holding grudges won't bring Ethan back. But I look at those pictures of them laughing and dancing while my son lay in the funeral home, and I can't. Forgiveness isn't mandatory, said Linda, whose weathered face spoke of years of hard-won wisdom, and it's sure as hell not on anyone else's timeline. My sister keeps posting about family drama, like my grief is some kind of inconvenience, like I'm choosing to be difficult instead of just broken. Some people can't handle other people's pain, Sarah said quietly. It makes them uncomfortable, so they blame you for not getting over it fast enough. The thing is, I said, my voice growing stronger, Ethan never drew pictures of them. In all his artwork, all his family drawings, it was just me and Daniel, and our neighbor Maria. He knew they weren't really part of our lives long before I was willing to admit it.
Children see clearly, Janet nodded. They haven't learned to make excuses for adults who disappoint them. We talked for another hour, and for the first time since Ethan died, I didn't feel alone in my grief. These people understood the weight of burying a child, the way it changed everything you thought you knew about the world. And they understood something else, too, that love doesn't automatically come with biology, that family is something you build through presence and loyalty and showing up when it matters most. As the meeting ended, Sarah approached me with a small piece of paper. My number, she explained, in case you need someone who gets it at 3 a.m. Trust me, I'm usually awake anyway. Marcus handed me his card as well. I run a memorial garden at the community center. If you ever want to plant something for Ethan, let me know. Walking to my car, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not for things to go back to the way they were, that was impossible. But hope that maybe, slowly, I could build something new from the ashes of my old life. Something stronger. Something real. I called Daniel on the way home. How was it? He asked. Hard, good. I think I want to go back next week. Good. Maria will be thrilled. She's been worried about you. Maria, Daniel, the support group, Sarah's late-night understanding, Marcus's memorial garden, a different kind of family, built not on obligation or blood, but on choice and love, and the simple act of showing up. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. Daniel? Yeah? I love you. Thank you for not leaving me to carry this alone. Never, he said simply. We're in this together, all of it. I drove home through the darkness, past the house where I'd grown up, past the church where my parents attended services every Sunday, past all the places where my old life used to live. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I had a new family to get home to. 6 months after Ethan's funeral, I found myself sitting at our kitchen table at 2 a.m., surrounded by notebook pages covered in my messy handwriting, plans, ideas, dreams that had grown from the deepest well of my grief. The Ethan Torres Foundation for Grieving Families, I wrote at the top of a fresh page, then stared at the words until they blurred. It had started as a whisper of an idea during one of our support group meetings. Marcus had mentioned how isolated he had felt after his son died, how even well-meaning friends didn't know how to help. Sarah had nodded, talking about the bureaucratic nightmare of planning a funeral while drowning in grief. Someone should create a resource, Linda had said quietly. A place where families know they can get real help, not just casseroles and platitudes. That someone, I realized, was me. Daniel found me there when he got up for work, my laptop open beside stacks of research I'd printed from grief counseling websites and nonprofit organization guides. "You've been up all night again," he said. But there was no judgment in his voice, just concern and something else. Pride, maybe. "I can't stop thinking about it, Daniel. About all the families sitting in hospital rooms right now, watching their children fight battles they can't win. About the parents who'll bury babies next week while their own families abandon them because grief is inconvenient." He poured coffee into 2 mugs, adding extra sugar to mine the way he'd learned I needed it during the hardest days. "Tell me what you're thinking." I spread my notes across the table like battle plans. A foundation that provides real, practical support to grieving families. Not just emotional support, though that too, but actual help. Someone to handle funeral arrangements when parents are too shattered to think straight. Emergency funds for families who can't afford burial costs. Counseling that doesn't come with a waiting list. And childcare. God, the number of times I needed someone to watch Ethan so I could fall apart in private or handle insurance calls or just sleep for more than 20 minutes. What about families with other children who need to normal life to continue while their sibling is dying? Daniel sat across from me, studying my makeshift business plan with the same intensity he brought to rebuilding car engines. "This is big, Amelia. Really big." "I know, maybe too big."
No, his voice was firm. Not too big. Necessary. I looked at him across the table. This man who'd held me through the worst months of my life, who'd never once suggested I should move on or find closure or any of the other meaningless phrases people used when grief made them uncomfortable. "You really think I could do this?" "I think you're the only person who could do this. You've lived it. You know exactly what families need because you needed it and it wasn't there." That afternoon, I called Maria to share my plans. She listened without interruption as I explained my vision, occasionally making small sounds of encouragement or approval. "Mija," she said when I finished, "this is what Ethan would want." His heart was always bigger than his body. He'd love knowing other families were being helped in his name. I don't know where to start, though. I've never run a nonprofit. I don't know about fundraising or legal requirements or... You start with what you know. You know grief. You know what helps and what doesn't. The rest, you can learn. She was right, of course. Maria had a way of cutting through my anxiety to the simple truth underneath. Over the next week, I threw myself into research with the kind of focused intensity I hadn't felt since Ethan's diagnosis. I read everything I could find about nonprofit management, grief counseling programs, and family support services. The support group became my testing ground. Each Thursday, I'd share new ideas with the other parents, asking what would have helped them most in their darkest moments. "Someone to handle the damn insurance calls," Marcus said immediately. I spent hours on hold with companies trying to explain that my son was dead while they kept asking for his social security number. "Meal coordination that actually works," added Sarah. "I had 17 casseroles the first week and nothing the second month when I actually needed help." "Emergency funds," Linda said quietly. "We went into debt burying Emma. No one talks about how expensive death is when you're barely keeping your head above water." Their input shaped my growing plan. The foundation would offer immediate crisis support, someone to handle logistics while families focused on being together, long-term counseling and support groups, emergency financial assistance, and most importantly, advocacy, making sure grieving families weren't forgotten once the initial sympathy died down. I started drafting grant proposals at night after Daniel fell asleep. The words came easily, maybe because they were written in blood and tears and hard-won understanding. I wrote about the isolation of losing a child in a society that preferred to look away from such tragedies, about families who suffered alone because grief made people uncomfortable, about practical needs that no one talked about but everyone experienced. The Ethan Torres Foundation will serve as a bridge, connecting grieving families with the resources they need to survive the unsurvivable, and ultimately to honor their children's memories by helping others. 3 weeks later, I had my first real breakthrough.
A local pediatric hospital administrator, Dr. Patricia Vega, agreed to meet with me after reading my preliminary proposal. She'd lost her own daughter years earlier and understood exactly what I was trying to create. "This is brilliant," she said, spreading my documents across her office desk. "Practical, compassionate, and desperately needed. I've been watching families struggle with these exact issues for years. So, you think it could work?" "I think it could change everything for families, for healthcare workers, for communities that don't know how to help." She leaned forward, her eyes bright with possibility. "What do you need to make this happen?" By the time I left her office, I had my first potential partner organization, a letter of support for grant applications, and something I hadn't felt in almost a year: genuine excitement about the future. That night, I called Janet from the support group to share the news. "Amelia, this is incredible. You're going to save families from suffering alone the way we did." "I'm terrified I don't know what I'm doing." "Honey, none of us know what we're doing when we start something that matters, but you know why you're doing it, and that's everything." I hung up and looked around our house. Ethan's artwork still covering the refrigerator, his model airplane still sitting unfinished on the shelf, his memory woven into every corner of our lives. My parents had seen his death as an ending, something to move past and forget. But I was beginning to see it as the beginning of something powerful, something that would ensure other families never felt as abandoned as we had. Ethan's life had been brief but meaningful. His death would be meaningful too, in ways my parents could never understand. He would live on in every family we helped. Every parent
Didn't have to grieve alone. Every child who received proper support because of the foundation bearing his name. My son would have a legacy, and I would be the one to build it. 3 years later, I was reviewing grant applications in my office at the Ethan Torres Foundation when my assistant knocked on the door. "Amelia, there's a woman here to see you. Says she's your mother." I looked up from the stack of papers detailing families in crisis, my pen frozen mid-signature. "My mother? Should I tell her you're busy?" Through my office window, I could see into the main lobby where families often waited for counseling appointments or support group meetings. There, looking completely out of place among the comfortable chairs and children's artwork, stood Lillian Morales, my mother. She wore a designer handbag and heels that clicked against the polished floor, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the fact that it was barely 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. "Give me 5 minutes, then send her in." I used those 5 minutes to study the woman who'd raised me, trying to see her through the lens of who I'd become rather than who I'd been. She looked older, more fragile somehow, with new lines around her eyes that spoke of worry, but she still carried herself with that familiar mixture of pride and entitlement that had defined my childhood. The knock came exactly on time. "Come in." Mom entered like she was stepping into a trap, her gaze sweeping over my diplomas on the wall, the photos of foundation events, the memorial corner dedicated to Ethan with his picture surrounded by thank you letters from families we'd helped. "You've done well for yourself," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk without being invited. "Thank you." I kept my voice neutral, professional. 3 years of therapy and support group meetings had taught me not to let her emotional manipulation find purchase. "The foundation is quite impressive. I saw the article in the Tribune last month about your work with the Children's Hospital." I waited. She hadn't come here to congratulate me on professional success. "Amelia, your father and we've been having some financial difficulties." There it was. I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. "I'm sorry to hear that." Sophia's divorce was expensive. The legal fees, the settlement, and your father's retirement investments haven't performed as well as we hoped. Of course, Sophia's marriage had imploded within 18 months, just as Daniel had predicted it would. Apparently, her new husband had expected a wife, not a princess, and couldn't sustain the lifestyle she demanded. What does this have to do with me? Mom's carefully composed mask slipped slightly. "We need help. Financial help. And your family." The audacity of it left me momentarily speechless. Family, the word she was using to manipulate me into rescuing them from the consequences of their choices. Family, I repeated slowly. That's interesting, because when I needed family 3 years ago, you were in Cancun drinking champagne. Amelia, please, can't we move past that? It was a terrible situation for everyone. It was a terrible situation for you? My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. Mom, my 10-year-old son died, and you couldn't be bothered to attend his funeral? How exactly was that terrible for you? You know that's not what I meant. Actually, I don't know what you meant, because nothing you've said since walking in here has acknowledged that you abandoned your daughter and grandson when we needed you most. She shifted uncomfortably, her handbag clutched like armor. We made a difficult choice in an impossible situation. You made a selfish choice in a situation that required compassion. There's a difference. We came to ask for help, not to rehash old grievances. Old grievances? I stood up, walking to the memorial corner where Ethan's smiling face looked back at me from a dozen photographs. Is that what you call the fact that you've never once asked how I'm doing, never acknowledged your grandson's death except to justify why you missed his funeral? The silence stretched between us like a canyon. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice smaller than before. We know we hurt you, but we're family, Amelia. Family forgives. Family shows up, I shot back. Family prioritizes each other's pain over social obligations. Family doesn't abandon each other when life gets messy and inconvenient. So, you won't help us? I looked at this woman who'd given birth to me, who'd taught me to tie my shoes and say my prayers, who'd somehow failed to teach me that love should be unconditional. I help families in crisis every day, Mom. Families who've lost children, who are struggling with medical bills, who need support navigating the worst moments of their lives. But I help families who understand what family means. You've become hard, she said, standing to leave. Losing Ethan changed you. You're right. Losing Ethan changed me, but not the way you think. I moved to the window overlooking our family resource center, where Daniel was helping a father fill out insurance paperwork while the man's wife attended a support group upstairs. Ethan's name is on this building. His memory helps keep other families from suffering alone the way we did. That's his legacy. That's what love looks like when it's real. Mom's eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even sadness. Just a calm certainty that I'd chosen the right path. I hope things work out for you and Dad, but I can't help people who don't understand what they did wrong. After she left, I sat in my office for a long time, looking at the grant applications spread across my desk. Families who needed emergency burial funds. Parents seeking counseling after losing children to cancer, accidents, suicide. Children who'd lost siblings and needed specialized support. Real families. Families who understood that love meant showing up, especially when it was hard. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Saw your mom's car in the parking lot. You okay? I typed back, perfect. See you at home. And for the first time in 3 years, I truly meant it. The call came on a Tuesday evening in October, 4 years after Ethan's death. I was reviewing applications for our new emergency assistance program when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Amelia? It's Sophia? I nearly dropped the phone. My sister and I hadn't spoken since that awful conversation about Facebook posts and family drama. According to the family gossip network that occasionally reached me through distant relatives, she'd been living with her parents since her divorce,
working part-time jobs and struggling to maintain the lifestyle she'd once taken for granted. "What do you want, Sophia? Can we meet? There are things I need to say, things that should be said in person." Something in her voice was different, smaller, less certain than the imperious tone I remembered. "I don't think that's a good idea. Please. I know I don't deserve it, but please." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a neutral location, a quiet cafe downtown, far from the neighborhood where we'd grown up and the memories that lived there like ghosts. She was already seated when I arrived, hunched over a cup of coffee that had clearly gone cold. Without her usual armor of designer clothes and professional makeup, Sophia looked ordinary, tired, human in a way I'd rarely seen her. "Thank you for coming," she said, as I sat down across from her.
The silence stretched between us like a canyon. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice smaller than before. "We know we hurt you, but we're family, Amelia. Family forgives." "Family shows up," I shot back. "Family prioritizes each other's pain over social obligations. Family doesn't abandon each other when life gets messy and inconvenient." "So you won't help us?" I looked at this woman who'd given birth to me, who'd taught me to tie my shoes and say my prayers, who'd somehow failed to teach me that love should be unconditional. I help families in crisis every day, Mom. Families who've lost children, who are struggling with medical bills, who need support navigating the worst moments of their lives. But I help families who understand what family means. "You've become hard," she said, standing to leave. "Losing Ethan changed you." "You're right. Losing Ethan changed me. But not the way you think." I moved to the window overlooking our family resource center, where Daniel was helping a father fill out insurance paperwork while the man's wife attended a support group upstairs. Losing him taught me the difference between people who love you conditionally and people who love you through anything, between people who show up when it's convenient and people who show up when it matters. And we didn't show up. It wasn't a question. For the first time in our conversation, she'd stated a simple truth without trying to justify or excuse it. "No, you didn't." She gathered her handbag and stood, her shoulders straighter than when she'd arrived. "I suppose there's nothing left to say then." "There's one thing." I turned from the window to face her directly. "The foundation helps about 300 families a year now. Every one of them knows they can count on us to be there in their darkest moments. Every parent who calls our crisis line knows someone will answer. Every child who loses a sibling knows they have a safe place to grieve." I gestured toward the memorial wall, where dozens of photos of children who died too young smiled back at us. "Ethan's name is on this building. His memory helps keep other families from suffering alone the way we did. That's his legacy. That's what love looks like when it's real." Mom's eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even sadness. Just a calm certainty that I'd chosen the right path. "I hope things work out for you and Dad," I said, meaning it. "But I can't help people who don't understand what they did wrong." After she left, I sat in my office for a long time looking at the grant applications spread across my desk. Families who needed emergency burial funds, parents seeking counseling after losing children to cancer, accidents, suicide, children who'd lost siblings and needed specialized support. Real families, families who understood that love meant showing up, especially when it was hard. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Saw your mom's car in the parking lot. You okay?" I typed back, "Perfect. See you at home." And for the first time in 3 years, I truly meant it. The call came on a Tuesday evening in October, 4 years after Ethan's death. I was reviewing applications for our new emergency assistance program when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Amelia? It's Sophia." I nearly dropped the phone. My sister and I hadn't spoken since that awful conversation about Facebook posts and family drama. According to the family gossip network that occasionally reached me through distant relatives, she'd been living with our parents since her divorce,
working part-time jobs and struggling to maintain the lifestyle she had once taken for granted. "What do you want, Sophia?" "Can we meet? There are things I need to say, things that should be said in person." Something in her voice was different, smaller, less certain than the imperious tone I remembered. "I don't think that's a good idea. Please, I know I don't deserve it, but please." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a neutral location, a quiet cafe downtown, far from the neighborhood where we'd grown up and the memories that lived there like ghosts. She was already seated when I arrived, hunched over a cup of coffee that had clearly gone cold. Without her usual armor of designer clothes and professional makeup, Sophia looked ordinary, tired, human in a way I'd rarely seen her. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down across from her.
The silence stretched between us like a canyon. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice smaller than before. "We know we hurt you, but we're family, Amelia. Family forgives. Family shows up," I shot back. "Family prioritizes each other's pain over social obligations. Family doesn't abandon each other when life gets messy and inconvenient." "So, you won't help us?" I looked at this woman who'd given birth to me, who'd taught me to tie my shoes and say my prayers, who'd somehow failed to teach me that love should be unconditional. "I help families in crisis every day, Mom. Families who've lost children, who are struggling with medical bills, who need support navigating the worst moments of their lives. But I help families who understand what family means." "You've become hard," she said, standing to leave. "Losing Ethan changed you." "You're right. Losing Ethan changed me. But not the way you think." I moved to the window overlooking our family resource center where Daniel was helping a father fill out insurance paperwork, while the man's wife attended a support group upstairs. Losing him taught me the difference between people who love you conditionally and people who love you through anything, between people who show up when it's convenient and people who show up when it matters. And we didn't show up. It wasn't a question. For the first time in our conversation, she'd stated a simple truth without trying to justify or excuse it. "No, you didn't." She gathered her handbag and stood, her shoulders straighter than when she'd arrived. "I suppose there's nothing left to say then." "There's one thing." I turned from the window to face her directly. "The foundation helps about 300 families a year now. Every one of them knows they can count on us to be there in their darkest moments. Every parent who calls our crisis line knows someone will answer. Every child who loses a sibling knows they have a safe place to grieve." I gestured toward the memorial wall, where dozens of photos of children who died too young smiled back at us. "Ethan's name is on this building. His memory helps keep other families from suffering alone the way we did. That's his legacy. That's what love looks like when it's real." Mom's eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even sadness, just a calm certainty that I'd chosen the right path. "I hope things work out for you and Dad." It meant it. But I can't help people who don't understand what they did wrong. After she left, I sat in my office for a long time, looking at the grant applications spread across my desk. Families who needed emergency burial funds. Parents seeking counseling after losing children to cancer, accidents, suicide. Children who'd lost siblings and needed specialized support. Real families. Families who understood that love meant showing up, especially when it was hard. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Saw your mom's car in the parking lot. You okay?" I typed back, "Perfect. See you at home." And for the first time in 3 years, I truly meant it. The call came on a Tuesday evening in October, 4 years after Ethan's death. I was reviewing applications for our new emergency assistance program when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize.
Amelia, it's Sophia. I nearly dropped the phone. My sister and I hadn't spoken since that awful conversation about Facebook posts and family drama. According to the family gossip network that occasionally reached me through distant relatives, she'd been living with her parents since her divorce, working part-time jobs and struggling to maintain the lifestyle she'd once taken for granted. What do you want, Sophia? Can we meet? There are things I need to say. Things that should be said in person. Something in her voice was different, smaller, less certain than the imperious tone I remembered. I don't think that's a good idea. Please. I know I don't deserve it, but please. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a neutral location. A quiet cafe downtown, far from the neighborhood where we'd grown up, and the memories that lived there like ghosts. She was already seated when I arrived, hunched over a cup of coffee that had clearly gone cold. Without her usual armor of designer clothes and professional makeup, Sophia looked ordinary, tired, human in a way I rarely seen her. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down across from her.
That evening, I told Daniel about the conversation while we made dinner together, a ritual that had become sacred in our rebuilt life. "How do you feel?" he asked, chopping onions while I stirred sauce on the stove. "Lighter, somehow. Like I've been carrying a weight I didn't realize was there." I tasted the sauce, adding more salt. She didn't ask for anything, didn't try to justify what they did, just admitted it was wrong. That's more than your parents have done. Much more. I turned to face him, this man who'd held me through the worst grief imaginable and helped me build something beautiful from the ashes. "Do you think I should tell them about Sophia's apology?" "What would be the point?" "I don't know. Maybe none." He pulled me into his arms, and I breathed in the familiar scent of him, motor oil and soap, and the cologne I'd bought him for our first Christmas together, 15 years ago. "You don't owe them anything," he said quietly. "Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, not even acknowledgement. You've built a life that honors Ethan's memory and helps other families. That's enough." He was right. It was enough. More than enough. Later that night, as I did every evening, I stopped by Ethan's memorial corner in our hallway. His photographs smiled back at me, birthday parties and hospital stays, quiet moments and joyful ones, the whole brief arc of his brave little life. "Your aunt apologized today. I think you would have liked that. You always believed people could be better than they were." I touched the frame gently, a gesture that had become as automatic as breathing. The foundation helped 18 families this week, 18 families who won't have to hurt alone the way we did. Your name is making a difference, baby, every single day. In the silence that followed, I could almost hear his voice, the way he used to comfort other kids in the hospital. "It's okay, Mom. You're helping people. That's what matters." Yes, I thought, walking toward the bedroom where Daniel waited. 5 years after I buried my son alone, I stood in the memorial garden behind the Ethan Torres Foundation, watching children play on the playground we'd built in his honor. Their laughter echoed across the space where families came to heal, to remember, to find hope in the midst of unimaginable loss. "The dedication ceremony starts in 10 minutes, Daniel called from the doorway, adjusting his tie. Today marked the opening of our crisis family housing, 6 apartments where grieving families could stay during their darkest hours, surrounded by support instead of isolation. I touched the bronze plaque mounted on Ethan's memorial tree, reading the inscription I'd written 3 years ago, in memory of Ethan Torres, whose brave heart teaches us that love is measured not in years, but in the lives we touch. "Ready?" Maria appeared beside me, elegant in navy blue, her grandson's hand tucked firmly in hers. At 8 years old, Little Miguel had become the foundation's unofficial mascot, his easy smile brightening the faces of children who'd lost siblings. More than ready. The ceremony was small but meaningful. The families we'd helped, staff members, board members, and the few relatives who'd chosen love over loyalty to my parents' version of family history. I noticed Sophia in the back row, keeping a respectful distance but present nonetheless. She'd been volunteering quietly with our administrative team for 6 months, never asking for acknowledgement or forgiveness, simply showing up to help. As I approached the podium, I caught sight of a familiar silver-haired woman standing near the garden entrance. My mother. She looked older, more fragile, her designer armor replaced by simple black dress and sensible shoes. Our eyes met across the crowd, and for a moment, time suspended itself. She nodded once, not an apology, but an acknowledgement. Then she turned and walked away, leaving me to speak about the life her choices had helped create. 5 years ago, I learned that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when your world falls apart. It's about who chooses to stay when staying is hard. I looked out at the faces before me. Sarah, who'd become like a sister through shared grief. Marcus, whose memorial expertise had helped dozens of families honor their children. Janet, who'd taught me that healing wasn't about moving on, but moving forward. Daniel, whose steady love had rebuilt me from the ground up. The Ethan Torres Foundation exists because a 10-year-old boy with a broken heart taught everyone who knew him that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about choosing love even when love means suffering, even when love means loss. Children's voices drifted from the playground, mixing with adult conversations about hope and healing. This was what my son's legacy looked like. Not silence and grief, but community and connection. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of support. Today, we open our doors wider, offering sanctuary to families when they need it most. Because no parent should face the death of a child alone. No family should be abandoned when tragedy strikes. And no child's memory should be overshadowed by the selfishness of people who choose celebration over compassion. After the ceremony, as families toured the new apartments and children played in Ethan's garden, I found myself alone for a moment with his memory. The late afternoon sun slanted through the trees he'd never climbed, warming the earth where his ashes weren't buried, but where his spirit lived on in every life we touched. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for showing me what real love looks like. Mom." I deleted it without responding. Some bridges, once burned, were meant to stay that way. "Ready to go home?" Daniel asked, sliding his arm around my waist. I looked around one more time at the world we'd built from loss, at families finding healing, children discovering they weren't alone in their grief, parents learning that survival was possible, at the foundation that bore my son's name and carried his heart into the world every single day. "Yeah," I said, leaning into the warmth of the only family that mattered. "Let's go home." Behind us, Ethan's memorial tree stood sentinel over his garden, its branches reaching toward a sky big enough to hold both sorrow and joy, loss and hope, endings and all the beautiful beginnings that grow from them.